Histories presents information based in part on facts and knowledge. The producer's purpose is to suggest the only possible explanations, but not necessarily the correct ones, to the mysteries we will examine. Welcome to Hidden Histories.
The year was 1860. The First Civil War of the United States was brewing. On April 9th, Edouard Léon Scott de Martinville recorded himself singing Au clair de la lune, the first known recording of the human voice. On September 1st, a solar coronal mass ejection hit Earth's magnetosphere, along with a total eclipse, subjecting the Earth to one of the largest geomagnetic storms on record. On that very night, Stephen Williams was born in Hickory Grove, South Carolina. Although both his feet were normal size, his unnamed mother passed away during childbirth. He was born without hair or eyebrows and was never able to grow either throughout his life. Some 3DO historians have attributed this to the fact he was born during the storm, while the attending physician, Dr. Hauser, noted on the birth certificate it was due to his mother's alcoholism. His father, Josiah Williams, who was a cotton salesman, sold Stephen for a cord of wood to the Hawkins family, who needed a strong boy for their small farm. The Hawkins were simple folk. They were pagan, which was deeply frowned upon by society at the time. Stephen's new parents, Jebediah and Mary Hawkins, changed his name to William Hawkins I, or Uno for short. William was a driven child and blossomed under the loving tutelage of his new family. The three would often play games of chance, luck, fate, skill, and fancy. Uno's childhood was as good as a childhood could be in the late 1800s. However, he could not escape his true heritage. He had a deep need to monetize his experiences. When Uno was 7 years old, he was brutally reprimanded at his schoolhouse for playing gypsy games in the schoolyard. He made 17 pennies that day, and he caught a fever. When Josiah passed on August 21st, 1882, Uno bid his mother goodbye the following day, stating,
"Thank you for your love, but I have a wild side to me and need to rid this course. I have a new world to explore. I will sell our gypsy games across this globe. I am going to skip town and head for New York."
Uno struggled when he first arrived in the Big Apple, making ends meet with simple ball and cup games on the street, until he tried to hustle one Willard Smith. After he was thousands of dollars in debt to the elderly Smith, Uno proposed one final bet. He would make a card appear under Smith's straw hat that would be a perfect representation of Uno's glabrous physical appearance. Smith took the double or nothing bet and lifted his hat to find an ordinary King of Hearts. He laughed victoriously as he held the card up to show the small audience that had gathered, but was halted as the group let out an audible gasp, witnessing the hair on both the face and head of the king disappear before their eyes. A night of discussion and drinks on Smith's tab ensued. He was astonished with Hawkins' skill and knowledge of the art of gypsy card games. At the end of the night, the two shook hands and Hawkins had secured a small loan to make his dream come true. The highest-rated entertainment enterprise, doubly officialized, was recognized as a business with the New York Chamber of Commerce on February 17th of 1883 and would come to be more commonly known by its acronym, 3DO. Hawkins greased the palms of several Chamber of Commerce officials and unprecedentedly received 2 official seals for his products: the official seal of the New York Chamber of Commerce, which was a real seal, and the official seal of Tobias Gorthrope, Lord of Games, which was simply the name of the notary on duty that day, but nonetheless made the claim of doubly officialized a statement of truth. The 3DO company took off, selling playing cards and card tricks such as the Gypsy Steal and the Jew's Hustle, which was a favorite amongst racist white Americans and the Ku Klux Klan. Trump's Wild allowed the holder of the trump card to literally sexually assault or steal from the other players with impunity. The player was also permitted to shoot one man without fear of prosecution or retaliation. 3DO also had a huge hit with the colorful and frenetic Uno. Uno married Henrietta Doraemon in 1885. The couple would have 3 children, 2 daughters whose names have long been forgotten, and the youngest, William II, or Deuce for short, born in the year 1890 and named for his place in the family, and also his massive first meconium movement. In 1917, 3DO reigned supreme as the country's largest producer of children's toys and games, including super popular variations of traditional playing cards such as the all-red diamonds deck, the all-blue rectangles deck, the yellow circle deck, the bizarrely named I Love deck, and the Mexican jumping deck. In October 1917, William Uno Hawkins I was killed in a horse and buggy accident, which were incredibly common at the time. Uno left his company to his only son, Deuce Hawkins, who had shown no propensity for business in his youth but had what at the time was considered a chromosomal advantage over his older siblings. Deuce took the 3DO to new heights, designing all of 3DO's card games for multiple players. He then added to the company's title the now legendary tagline, Interactive Multiplayer. 3DO would have a huge hit in 1919 with a new interactive multiplayer card game, Don't Get the Flu. Ignoring the advice of all public health officials at the time and defiantly contrasting with the popular bicycle card game, Solitaire. In the austere 1930s, 3DO managed the impossible, another hit, the role-playing card game Breadline. The cards were printed on rice paper, were edible, and were cheaper than a loaf of bread. The game fetches exorbitant fees in the modern 3DO card game collector's market, with only 7 uneaten packs known to exist. World War II put an end to the company's rice paper decks. The company's manufacturing plants took to printing cards for the boys overseas, replete with up-tops and plentiful lush bush. After the Allied victory, the 3DO took back control of their manufacturing and again concentrated on children's games. Babies were being born all over the USA, including in his own family, a bastard son mothered by his girlfriend, Faye L. Bechtel. Its name, William III, or Trip. Faye left the two and moved to California shortly after the birth. In post-war America, the materials of industry were abundant. The public, young and old, were hungry to consume them. 3DO came up with a bold new family card game, Bang. The deck weighed in at 9 pounds and consisted of a deck of 4 blank metal cards, a vial of gunpowder, a hammer, and a glass bottle. With these ingredients, families were free and encouraged to devise their own rule set. True interactivity ensued, as well as many deaths. Due to the lack of consumer protections at the time and fine print claiming no liability, doubly officialized, only one lawsuit was filed in association with the game. When Pittsburgh steelworkers George and Mary Martin lost all 3 of their children to the game, as their only means of recourse, the mourning couple wrote a letter to the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette to complain about the product. 3DO would return fire, suing the family for defamation, stating the family had broken their agreement of double officialization. 3DO won the lawsuit, and George and Mary purchased another copy of the game, using it to kill themselves in a horrific double suicidation. Trip's childhood was a world of wonder and laxity. With his father busy with the company, Trip was often left to his own devices for days on end, only interacting with the family's servants, including his own personal jester, Kurokishi no Kamen, a retired demolition man whom Deuce had hired in lieu of a proper nanny. Trip was free to draw from the family bank accounts at will, and he had no rules he was required to follow. By the time he was in his teens, his lack of structure and discipline led to Trip showing up at school in the nude and occasionally with shaving cream covering his entire head. This outward appearance of freedom, along with the beginnings of the youth revolution and his name being Trip, led his peers to believe he was an LSD enthusiast. His friends at school began to dose Trip daily, often in his milk, at lunchtime, assuming that he would appreciate the gesture. Since these daily misunderstandings coincided with the onset of Trip's pubescence, Trip began to believe that this was just what it felt like to be an adult. It was in this transformative life stage that Trip moved out of his father's home and into a virtual house. This was a house that only he could see, built under the Brooklyn Bridge. Tripp would remain unknowingly high on LSD for 8 years and would come to believe that he was a robot named Pretty Soldier Sailor Moon S. It would take a further 40 years for him to come all the way down. Tripp would remain unaware of the source of his psychedelic adolescence until 2014, when one of his teenage friends, Yu Gekman, aka Gex, whom Tripp perceived as a talking anthropomorphic gecko throughout his youth, came clean publicly. On April 14, 1981, William Deuce Hawkins passed away in his sleep at the age of 91, leaving his position as head of the board of the now incorporated 3DO to his only child. Tripp had no business training, and due to the neglect he experienced as a child and his constant involuntary drug use, he could barely even read. An emergency board meeting was held the next day. Tripp was sworn in as chairman and immediately had a laundry list of complaints.
Guys, what is up with these boring-ass card games you're putting out for the past few years? So boring, man. When I was a teenager, you guys were making the most amazing games. The cards were so alive, like colorful, like Ultraman, like moving, and the music, oh, they would play music. Now these games don't even have a soundtrack at all. These games are Jurassic. Park interactive multiplayer in the past and take a trip to the future with the robot, Pretty Soldier Sailor Moon S. Me. We need to tap into the collective mind of the public. You know, the Zadnos, the People's Party, man. Fucking DNA Helix, yeah!
The board sat in stunned silence. They were as unaware of Tripp's teenage acid adventures as he was, and they had never been spoken to in such a manner. Board member Pat Enka finally spoke up.
Tripp? Young man? We have never made cards that are anything like what you're describing.
Tripp lashed out.
You are fired, you twisted green old bug-eyed demon gargoyle-looking fuck.
Tripp had no authority to fire Enka, and thus began the shadow war of succession between Tripp and the board of 3DO. In June of 1981, the board sent Tripp as their representative to the Greater Atlantic Gaming Meetup and Expo, or GAGME. Tripp was happy to leave as tensions with the board had reached a boiling point when he suggested they create a new game called Card Toons, where the cards come to life and become your friends. When Tripp arrived in New Jersey, he was to set up a booth and display the company's wares. But being the free soul he was, Tripp threw the merchandise, along with his shirt, jacket, and shoes, in the first dumpster he saw, cut off his slacks, and wandered the expo to take in the sights. Tripp's wanderings would prove fortuitous and would change the world of gaming entertainment forever. He worked his way to the main hall. It was packed with robed figures and people dressed in full armor. On stage, a young shoe salesman named Tim Nendo was digging through boxes of shoes, looking for a shoe large enough to fit the right foot of the man sitting in the jewel-encrusted throne at the center of the stage. The banner above them read, "Ked's Shoes presents ceremonial shoe fitting of the mighty dungeon master Gary Gygax, 2 p.m. The audience sat in hushed anticipation as Gygax massaged his obscenely large, naked right foot, occasionally moaning.
Son of a bitch! Who the hell put this together? None of these shoes will fit. Not even any of these boxes would fit. Could we move this along? I am a very busy man. Motherfucker!
Nendo whipped a black boot into the audience and slammed the mic into his forehead.
Fuck this! I am done with shoes!
The audience gasped, and Nendo, whose forehead was now bleeding profusely, took a breath, turned his back on Gygax, and stepped to the front of the stage, addressing the audience.
I have a question for you people. How can you play a game that only happens in your imagination? The imagination isn't even real. It's just an idea. I'll tell you what.
Gygax interrupted.
What about my special shoe?
Nendo snapped back at Gygax.
Shut the fuck up, Sasquatch. You are responsible for the loss of hope and joy these kids feel. I am about to slay the entire history of gaming, starting with your Dungeons and Dragons.
It's Advanced Dungeons and Dragons, Slayer.
I have seen the future of games, and it isn't in a deck of cards. It isn't in a board that sits on a crummy kitchen table. It certainly isn't in this cowboy casino crap. And God knows it isn't in your imagination. At least it's never been in mine. Real pinball? Please. The future of games will take place on your television. They will move. They will seem alive. They will be colorful. There will be music. Mark my words, you little worms. 2 fucking words. Video games. Soon we will all entertainment system. See you later.
He dropped the mic and stomped off stage, leaving Gygax stunned and his giant foot shoeless. Trip Hawkins, however, was inspired by Tim's monologue. What Nendo had described was exactly how Trip remembered the 3DO card games of his youth. Trip spent that night at a nearby bus stop. After stealing a notebook and a pen from a homeless man, he wrote a letter to Nendo.
Dear Tim Nendo, whoa, man, whoa. Like, do you even know, man? Like, seriously, whoa. Me and you are kindred spirits, my man. I am Robot Pretty Soldier Sailor Moon S. And I saw you in my crystal ball. Just like you saw the future of my company, 3DO. I knew those games were real, man. I knew they could be real. Real interactive multiplayer. Slam and jam, my man. Your best friend, Trip Hawkins.
Nendo never replied. Upon arrival back at the 3DO headquarters, Trip called an emergency meeting. He stated if 3DO didn't make video games their top priority, he would leave them to crash and burn. He was immediately shown the door. In the following weeks, Hawkins meditated, developing his personal philosophy he would come to call the Way of the Warrior, and hired an imaginary mercenary, or immercenary, to be his bodyguard. He made several large withdrawals from his family inheritance, secured additional financial backing from venture capitalist Wilbur Smith, and began the process of transforming into a robot. Over the next several years, he repeatedly traveled to Singapore and had his right hand removed and replaced with a robotic prosthetic with a keyboard on it. He also had his larynx removed and a stereo grafted to his chest to allow him to speak by typing into the keyboard. In 1987, this would become the model for the Power Glove, the first product for his new company he intended to be called Electronic Hearts. However, due to the primitive text-to-voice program in his chest continuously misinterpreting the H in hearts as silent, the company would come to be known as Electronic Arts. In addition to the Power Glove, Trip began developing video games for the then-fledgling companies Intellivision and the less popular Atari. He made several groundbreaking contributions to gaming, including the introduction of FMV, or full motion video, as well as the first video game to be accused of inspiring a mass shooting. The publicity made EA an instant success. Trip's games were bizarre, revolutionary, and based on his youth. The first year's slate included Time Loop with its looping time game mechanic, Time Loop with its looping time game mechanic, the stressful and tense Going to the Store, School, and A Chat with the Parents, the endless and open world of Why Won't This End, and the first known survival horror game, This Isn't Puberty, It's LSD, in which Trip unknowingly gamified his own autobiography. Trip and EA grew into the country's most successful game developer when, in a coup of epic proportions, he snatched the rights for John Madden Football from Intellivision. The game that was famously named after Gary Gygax's large foot was a massive hit and further established EA as a premier developer of video games. Trip later stated in an interview with Rad Game Magazine, who had given Madden 10 out of 10 rads,
I did not understand what the point of the game was, man. Like, it's trippy. Nothing melts in it, the colors don't pulsate. Whoa, like seriously? It's a scramble cobra. Oops. Sorry. Typo. Meant to say a strange game. The music doesn't sound much like Hendrix, but the kids seemed to love it.
In the same article, John Madden replied to a question about his choice to jump from Intellivision, managing to brutalize Intellivision CEO Janet Intellivision, one of only 2 female CEOs in the country at the time, and his former business partner Gary Gygax, in 30 words.
Intellivision? What a nightmare. A real bitch. She was someone I had to escape from. Monster. Man, her foot was twice as big and gross as Gary's, and Tripp offered more money.
Meanwhile, 3DO was struggling. They found themselves falling behind gaming trends with their all-analog card games Edict. In 1991, after the catastrophic failure of their flagship game, Video Game the Card Game, the board voted unanimously to get Tripp back into the boardroom, no matter the cost. Hawkins, who had spent the better part of a decade becoming a robot and growing EA as a capitalist cybernetic extension of his own heart, agreed to take the position under one condition. He would have complete control of the 3DO company. After a brief meeting, the board agreed, and Tripp left EA to return to the family business. In sharp contrast to his work at EA, where he used his creativity to craft the imaginative games that had revolutionized the industry, Tripp decided to put all of his artistic energy into 3DO's business model itself and would leave the creation of content to third parties. His first order of business was to meet with stone sculptor Jacques Gare de Anouar in Italy. In an attempt to describe to de Anouar how he wanted each unique handcrafted 3DO game machine to look, Tripp detailed a modern seal of the pharaoh. Inside is a godlike creature that is neither born nor dead, nor anything in betwixt, but with an omniscient eye and 1,000 souls at its disposal. And thus began Tripp's new business model, in which each console was intended to be a one-of-a-kind work of art. Ultimately, this would prove to be a flawed business model and would lead to the dissolution of the 3DO company. The first and only console took 7 months for de Anouar to sculpt. Its body was constructed of razor-sharp obsidian encrusted with ruby, with an inner shell made of granite and gold. The machine weighed in at a shocking 1,500 pounds, more than a grand piano. De Anouar refused to put wheels on the machine, stating it would compromise his vision. When it was finally finished, the 3DO Real Interactive Multiplayer Jewelified Obsidian box was put up for auction at Sotheby's with a starting bid of $123,000. Only one person would bid on the eccentric console. The bidder was a young rich boy named Martin Scarelli. Only one game was ever made for the 3DO, the universally panned hardcore XXX-rated Plumbers Don't Wear Ties, produced by the film company Caballero. Apparently one to hold a grudge, Scarelli in 2012 expressed disappointment that no further games were ever made, and made several death threats toward Hawkins on his YouTube channel, including one where he promised to, quote, bring down upon him the full blade force of the armed forces of Ali, including Foreman, Frazier, and Spinks, in a station invasion that will usher in the Iron Angel of the Apocalypse. This one and only prototype is now owned by Hidden Histories curator Thomas Dell, purchased in Scarelli's impromptu estate sale in 2017. In 2014, Yu Gekman published his memoir Tripping Tripp, exposing the years of involuntary drug abuse he and his peers had subjected Tripp to. Shortly after, in Rad Game Magazine issue 3452, former 3DO board member Victor Raymond Stocker, or VR, stated, "Makes sense." Tripp returned to Electronic Arts in an honorary advisory role. To this day, Tripp is suggesting ideas with advances in technology, finally allowing him to suggest that they change the name to Electronic Hearts, as he had originally intended. He also continually proposes that they produce a video game called Card Toons. The board of EA continues to ignore him.
I can feel it in the air tonight.